the button twice.
Can I say the same things again?
Yeah. Here we go. I get caught out by that more than I don't. The trouble is you have to press the live button twice, and so that foxes me, I'm afraid. So we have the subject of transhumanism, and we have Blay Whitby once again. He's coming back. He's a favorite guest of ours. And he's just got back from Cornwall. So here he is. Blay, how did you find Cornwall?
Well, not quite as busy as previous summers, which was pleasant in its way. It really is a beautiful part of this country. But I suppose come the school holidays, they will be very busy because people aren't flying abroad this year.
Yes, that's the wrong answer. You're supposed to say, I just drove down the A30 and there it was.
Well, I prefer the coastal road.
So, I want to tell the people that I'm not entirely human.
You're half cow.
I have an artificial aortic valve that's made of a piece of cow tissue. And I was told at the time that there were no side effects. But since I've had it, my calves have started growing udders.
Ha ha. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Okay, right, enough of that nonsense. Over to you. What can you tell us about transhumanism, Blay?
Well, the first and most important thing I want to say is there should be a lot more public interest in this subject than there is. As a technology ethicist, I started publishing on the ethics of AI over 35 years ago. And now I'm on various committees. Now I'm asked to decide what laws should be passed about AI and so on. But if I had to look to the future, if I had to say what technology is coming and we really need to take the ethical decisions about it, I'd say that's transhumanism. It's going to make a tremendous difference, and I hope I get time in my talk to say there's some really big questions, some really brave questions. In fact, John and I were talking about a book which I'd quite recommend, relevant to this subject, called Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari. And the title is, the divine human would be a rough translation of the Latin. Up to now, we've been Homo sapiens, merely the knowing human. But now we have to swallow hard and realize that the future of the planet, in fact, the future of all known intelligent life depends on us and the decisions we take. And some of them are very, very big decisions, and a number of them are in this area, which I guess is why I find it both challenging and fascinating. And I just wish I could get some general public discussion going about this, because I don't want to say it's in the hands of the fanatics, but it's in the hands of a very small group who have a distinct agenda, and there should be widespread public discussion about this, because these issues affect everyone. They affect all life on this planet.
Yeah, we've got to accept that we are God-man now.
Yes.
And those people who deny anthropocentric climate change are wrong.
I think they're a very strange and small group of cranks, actually. Again, it's like so many things. The evidence for anthropogenic global warming is really overwhelming. There's no point in denying it. The only debate is, what are we going to do about it? But I feel it's the same with transhumanism, actually. But I'll come to that, because people might want to deny it as well as suggest other things to do about it.
They will be commenting. They will be putting up their questions.
I really hope so, because this is something that really needs widespread debate.
Just reminding them to put a Q if they have a question. Actually, next week, if I can do a little plug, we have the subject of nuclear power. No thanks, question mark, because that's changed its reputation over the last few decades. And that'll be a subject worthy of our attention on Wednesday at 8 next week.
Okay. I might have some questions about that.
Yeah, I expect so.
But that's not for tonight.
Do you want me to screen? You'll be welcome to join in next week, of course. Do you want me to screen your PowerPoint?
If you would, please, yes.
Okay.
Okay, feel free to email me.
Tell me what you want me to slide, James.
As I say, I've put my email up there, and I will be interested in hearing what people have got to say. Next slide, please, John. I guess the first question is, what is transhumanism? And this definition I've taken from what used to be the World Transhumanist Organization. It's now called H+, because people are playing name games with a lot of this. But it's an intellectual and cultural movement. That's important. I'll talk about the culture, possibility, and again, a key point here, desirability of fundamentally improving the human condition, right? Blah, blah. Widely available, again, we want to discuss that. Technologies to eliminate aging, and there's a lot to say about that, and enhance human intellectual, physical, and psychological capabilities. That's as good a definition as you'll find, really. Next slide, please, John, because it comes in two parts. Next slide.
Oh, wait a minute.
Have we got a problem?
It's not there we go.
You've actually jumped one there.
Okay, I'll try and go back there.
No.
Oh.
You're going forward.
Really? Oh, wait a minute. Let me see if I can. How's that?
No, it was slide 3 was on it, but don't worry. Where are we up to? I'll talk. Oh, wait a minute. Mine says. You've gone to slide 5, but let me talk to that so you don't have to go back. It's changed from transhumanism to humanity plus or H plus, but all these names have in common, as I've said there, an evangelical enthusiasm for new and perhaps mythical technologies which have the potential to alter spectacularly what it is to be human. So in other words, we're moving to being more than human. We're moving to being post-humans. Some writers say we already are post-human, but I'm not pushing that on you. And I use the word evangelical there advisedly, because I was at a transhumanism conference. I've been at a few. This one was in Dublin, I think. And someone from the local theological college presented a paper called Is Transhumanism a Religion? And they looked at various features of transhumanism and its advocates, and some of them I have to say do sign their emails. Death is now optional, so eternal life is one of the things that's floating about in transhumanism. They concluded that transhumanism was a religion. That's not the interesting thing. The interesting thing was none of the delegates at that conference said they were wrong. So whether or not you feel it's a religion, it has most of the features of a religion. And it's one of the reasons why I say there should be widespread discussion of this, because people self-identify as transhumanists, and they have a tremendous enthusiasm for these new technologies. New and mythical technologies, because I have to say they're not all here yet. And just because you heard me throw in the slogan, death is now optional, don't start believing it. Because, again, there are people who will tell you that, but that's another technology that isn't quite here yet. Next slide, please, John.
I wondered if you wanted to mention Aubrey de Grey when you said death is optional.
Well, I will, because now you've brought up Aubrey de Grey, I'll say there is a prominent figure in this area called Aubrey de Grey, instantly recognizable by a beard that comes down at least to his waist. I was at another transhumanism conference, Conway Hall, this one, and he gave his normal talk, his talk that death, well, he didn't say death is now optional. He said biologists, he's not a biologist, he's a computer scientist by training, which may or may not be relevant. Biologists in the medical profession are rather defeatist and accepting death and aging as just inevitable processes, just as we can keep old steam engines and old cars and water mills going indefinitely, so we can keep human beings going indefinitely. He's actually identified the 7 main problems and says if we were motivated, we could simply fix them. Now, what was interesting about that, and interesting about my talk, is he said, as a good public speaker would, he said, who in this audience would, given the opportunity, want to live forever? And an audience that consisted more or less entirely of PhD students in their 20s and journalists all put their hands up. And I thought I was rather disingenuous, because every one of his slides had the name of the organization that was sponsoring him. And I think a better question would have been, how do you feel about living a normal lifespan, but having your grandchildren live in a world where a small group of very rich Californians have used their extreme wealth to extend their lives and become even wealthier? Because that's kind of more realistic as to what's going on. Now we've gone back to slide 3.
Yes, I wondered if you wanted to speak to slide 3, so I managed to get there for you.
Okay, well, that's the World Transhumanism, the World, or H+, or WTA, World Transhumanist Association, as was, admitting that we might need to discuss some ethical matters. And I've just suggested one ethical matter there, which is this stuff just for the rich? While I'm on that, other things transhumanists say to me, an important thing that, again, a Californian transhumanist said to me in an email was, and I'd like people to think about this one, and it's one for you, John, because you're a parent. Just as every parent has the moral duty, this is not a moral right, this is a moral duty, to buy the best education they can for their children, so they have the moral duty, it's not a right, it's a duty, the moral duty to buy the best genes they can for their children. Well, it's a hard argument to argue against, but you'll see why technology ethicists might be interested in this area. And when I go on, I'm going to say that genetic selection isn't complete pie in the sky. It's something that we do really know how to do. We're just dragging our feet a bit about doing it. But I'm jumping a lot here. Can we go on? Where was I up to? We're familiar with these technologies. Yes, there we go. It's slide 6, John. We do know of technologies that we can use to enhance humans. Depending on the sport you pick, you know very, very well that athletic performance can be enhanced by the right chemicals or other techniques. There are other techniques, including swapping blood and so on. And sport's an interesting case to consider because we have these very sniffy ethics about sport. You can improve your performance by practicing and practicing. You could take, for example, 2 little girls about the age of 3 and make them play tennis all day, every day, in such a way that they would grow up with a musculature and skeletal development suitable for tennis playing, and then they would both, these sisters, become world champions. That's not considered cheating. That's considered training hard. But of course, to get a surgeon or some clever physicians to achieve the same result by surgery, like having an aortic valve implanted, or by chemistry, by pharmacology, that's considered cheating. In fact, it's not quite as simple as that, because there's a massive list of which drugs are allowed and which drugs aren't. I should say the only reason I know this is because I teach this sort of stuff to medical students and I get them to present, and they sometimes show these lists, and it all depends on the sport. Some things are allowed in training but not in competition. Some things are allowed in competition but not in training, and it's a happy hunting ground for lawyers. But the idea that you can't enhance human performance is quite nullified by the fact that we need authorities and constant testing to stop athletes doing it. We also engage in what can I say? Cosmetic surgery was invented here in Sussex at East Grinstead to repair the faces of young men who'd got Spitfire hurricane rash, it was called, from burning in aircraft in the Battle of Britain. But of course, the highest paid, and this is important too from what I've already said about wealth and distribution, the highest paid cosmetic surgeons are not repairing facial injury. They are helping people who make a living by looking rather attractive continue to look attractive for longer, or look even more attractive. They're working in Hollywood, basically. We're jumping around slides here. I'm on slide 6.
Okay, where would you like me to go? 7?
No, we'll stay on 6.
Okay.
Because I've talked about enhancement in sport and cosmetic enhancement. These are things that are already happening. These are things we already know about. Now, genetic selection, you may think that's all science fiction, that's in the future. But one thing I get the medical students to discuss is Down syndrome. They won't let me call it Down syndrome anymore now. It's called trisomy 21. And it's a genetic disorder. And if you find yourself carrying a fetus with this genetic condition, it's now quite reliably detectable. Here in Brighton at the Royal Sussex County Hospital, people will put pressure on you to have an abortion. That, of course, is genetic selection. People also are inclined to abort fetuses with dwarfism, and the dwarfs have a pressure group saying this is genocide. Down syndrome people aren't quite well organised enough to have a pressure group, but they're probably being subjected to genocide. So what I'm saying is we already do genetic selection, and it's like all ethical matters. I'm not saying it's right or wrong to abort a fetus with a particular genetic condition. I'm just saying we already do it. Where you draw the line is one of those arguments. I can only quote a philosopher that I admire greatly, Philippa Foot. She was the person who first set that runaway tram running, what's now called the trolley problem. That was all her idea. And she says something like, the fact of twilight does not entail that there is no difference between night and day. And again, we could have a debate. There are some genetic conditions which really are pretty grim, and abortion might be right in those cases. And then there are others which, like dwarfism, where you might just be wiping out a group of people for no good reason, or just for cosmetic reasons, just because you don't want small people in your population. So it's already happening. I'm not an expert on the area, but I believe when people go to buy sperm from sperm banks, they're interested in sperm from athletes with a PhD from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, because, again, everybody wants sporty, healthy kids. Well, we already do genetic selection. In case I don't get time to say more about this, another very good book I'd recommend, an easy-to-read book, is The Case Against Perfection by Michael Sandel. And the key point he makes in that book is we all know about eugenics because that was popular in the first half of the 20th century. Then it got a thoroughly bad press in the hands of the National Socialist government in Germany. And it possibly deserves that bad press. However, he says, what's fashionable now is not state-instituted genetics, where a government decides what the population should be. It's what he calls supermarket eugenics, where parents just choose what sort of kids they want. And in many ways, that's even more worrying than having the government choose. Because essentially everybody wants the same sort of kids. We've seen that with the one-child policy in China, where one wants to say, oh, now you're all complaining there's no wives for your sons. Well, duh. You don't need to be that smart to work that one out. But then ethics is full of things where everybody thinks it's someone else's job to do the right thing, and they don't realize that they're the problem. There are dozens of examples about that. But I won't get into that. Now,
you talked about Down syndrome now having a new name of trisomic 21.
Yeah.
The chromosome, which is triplicated instead of merely being duplicated.
That's correct.
When it was called Mongolism before Down syndrome. So what's happening here is every generation we have to find a new PC word, because nasty people start using the former medical term as an insult.
I've got a very important thing to say about that. I don't know if there's any Japanese people listening, but they can be a little bit smug for this example. It's true that when you and I were young, John, it was called Mongolism because people thought it was a reversion to an inferior, in quotes, what they considered an inferior race. However, I am told reliably that the colloquial Japanese name for trisomy 21, which affects Japanese people just as well, was Englishism. Right? Because they saw Down syndrome people as big, plump and slow-witted like the English. So that goes to show these things cut both ways, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
But my medical students will always say, do you mean trisomy 21? Cognitive enhancement, that's making yourself smarter. We actually know, I often get the students to present on zootropic, I think nootropic is the term, pharmacology. In other words, drugs that make people smarter. The most common one is coffee. There's no doubt that coffee makes people smarter. There are side effects, and it's addictive, but it's considered safe. It's the one stimulant that pilots are allowed, even in commercial flying. There are whole lists of other drugs, and students taking their finals, I'm trying to remember, modafinil, I think, is the drug of choice. I'm not recommending any of these. Kids say no to drugs, but modafinil is commonly used by students to get them through exams and so on. And if you go online, there'll be a lot of claims about drugs that things. There's also transcranial direct stimulation, which is not a sort of DIY ECT. It uses very low voltages, which people have made claims for. My latest understanding is that has been thoroughly investigated and it doesn't work, which is one of the reasons I'm saying may or may not be happening. One thing you can't quote me on, but again, I hear rumors, is that various military organizations, including the US Marines and the French Army, are very interested in this stuff. One thing that the military want is a technique for eliminating the need to sleep. And volunteers, in scare quotes, I hear, unofficially, have been volunteered for some pretty nasty experiments on this. It may be that the military get to the cognitive enhancement first. They certainly, again, you didn't hear this from me, don't quote me on it, but if you join the British Army, they'll test your eyesight and offer you laser eye surgery straight away, because that's their attitude to enhancement. You know, if your vision can be improved, it will be improved. So again, that's one of the reasons I say may or may not, because I don't have any access to secret material. I only know the rumors, but the military are clearly interested in this. Simply staying awake. We know that, the current generation of amphetamines are from World War II pilots, keeping them awake for long flights and so on. So there's probably lots of stuff going on in the black. Next slide, please.
You remind me of when I was doing my first degree exams. We were taking pills called Pro Plus because they contained caffeine.
Yeah, well, there's stronger stuff now. The interesting thing, John, is, I asked the medical students about the ethics of it. Is it cheating and so on? And they say, no, it's not cheating. And what's more, so they even go to the dean of the medical school who says, no, it's not even against the rules. So, again, I'm not saying take them, I'm just saying it's widespread. Okay, there's a chap in the Uhiro Institute for the Future of Humanity at Oxford who in his talk says, I'm not a transhumanist, but, which kind of gives you the religious feeling to the whole thing. I'm trying to remember his name now. It'll come to me. I think I mentioned him last week, but his claim is that we ought, in fact, to be morally enhancing people. We should be working out ways to make people behave better, because over this century and with the transhumanist development, we'll, what is his name? It's a Romanian name. We'll make ourselves much cleverer, but we'll just be massively intelligent psychopaths, and we need to do some moral enhancement. He doesn't have any real claim as to how we might do that. The other thing is designer babies. It's very, very hard to be sure. I mean, again, major genetic disorders, and you can select fetuses before pre-implantation, but whether or not you can produce a Barbie doll genetically, again, is a little more speculative. And we've mentioned Aubrey de Grey, and people saying death is now optional. Well, it's not really. Again, these technologies aren't there yet. Next slide, please.
Can I remind
Julian Savulescu, I've remembered his name now. It's Julian Savulescu. If you want to put it's Savalescu. Julian Savalescu has published a number of papers saying we need to work on moral enhancement, making ourselves better. I have to say, as a professional ethicist, I'm not sure it even makes sense to me. But maybe people have questions about how that might be done. I mean, again, it's something that I have worked on and published on. But
I just wanted to remind people that 4 weeks ago, we had a program on longevity featuring Dr. Mark Darcy, who took us through it and recommended some drugs that we might take to prolong our lives or make us feel more energetic when we're elderly.
Well, there you go. There's transhumanism happening for you already.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of people say, oh, these transhumanists, they're just a bunch of fanatics. They're all talking nonsense. I want to kind of argue against that. No, there's stuff going on here, and we need to decide who gets it, where and when and how. And there's some really difficult questions coming up.
Well, that program is available on YouTube, where the library of all our events can be found.
Can I have the next slide, please, Stuart?
There we go.
Okay. Well, if you've been following me so far, I think there's two reasons you might think that I'm going off on some sort of personal trip. So I'd like to deal with two questions really quite separately. I actually find as a technology ethicist that it helps me, I don't know if it helps you, but it certainly helps me to split the technical questions from the ethical questions, because often they're mixed up and intertwined in a real mess. And as far as possible, I like to prize them apart. So I'd like to do that here. I'd like to say, question one, will it really happen? Is it, are these real possibilities? And two, what, if anything, and that's something, that I was taught as an undergraduate, right? We don't have to do anything. So what, if anything, should we do about it? And one of the options is do nothing. Okay, next slide, please. The next slide is question one, I'm sure. Will it really happen? We've jumped here.
Okay, so this one.
Yeah. You may or may not remember from the World Transhumanist Organization, or H+, that the claim was the technology that will cause these changes will soon be built. Is this really true? Next slide. I call this the technological premise. And one confusing concept that I'd like to introduce here, but one that the transhumanists will throw at me all the time, is the singularity. And singularity is worth unpacking too. The name was coined by Werner Vinge, who's a science fiction writer and a mathematics lecturer at the University of Southern California, San Diego. And he's correct, really, mathematically, to call it a singularity, because this is a point in the future beyond which we can't really see. So the singularity is a point at which all predicted bets are off. So for someone like me in the business of predicting technology, the singularity is as far as we can possibly see. And so-called singularitarians say it's coming, and it's coming soon. If you're interested, the earliest date given for it was September 2016, so not all predictions can be right about this. And one of the reasons they say that we're looking at a singularity is we just can't say what will happen when some of the existing technologies are combined. That's what I mean by new convergences. To me, it looks like a cheat, because they're simply saying you can't predict. Next slide, please. There are some possibilities for convergence, and here are some of them: artificial intelligence and robotics. People also say AI plus nanotechnology. And I'll just throw in a technology that I'm quite interested in, and you probably haven't heard about, but it's real and it's happening. It's happening in this country right now. That's slave bacteria. These are genetically modified bacteria which we can use to do jobs for us. Yes, you heard me right. Some important work, I think, was done at the University of Aston in Birmingham by a master's student, where they genetically modified E. coli, good old E. coli, so that you could, by radio control, make the E. coli swim or not swim. You could actually turn the flagella on and off. And that's an impressive piece of technology. So if you want to know how we can do nanotechnology, we can genetically modify bacteria to work for us. I'm not happy with the word slave there, but that's the word that's commonly used, slave bacteria. And before you say it, yes, I'm an ethicist. Is there a risk? Oh, God, yes, there's a risk. Right? With E. coli, we're talking about something that can double its mass in 40 minutes if there's a food source available, and it can eat most organic matter. Could this go wrong? Could this get out of control? Yes, of course. Is there a risk? There's a big risk. But there's an interesting new technology. Human-computer symbiosis, yeah, that's possibly coming too. And IBM have a number of patents on direct implants. It turns out, in fact, I might as well say that I've spent probably 15 or 20 years on various ethics committees saying no to bright young postgraduates who want to stick wires into their brain to make a direct interface with a computer. And the reason I've said no is because I'm advised by my biological colleagues that to get the wires anywhere interesting in the human brain, you'd have to pass them through a lot of tissue, and the smallest wires we can make are several brain cells wide, so there would be serious damage, and I've said no. Maybe I'm some sort of Luddite there. Would it work technologically? Because that's what we're not doing the ethics now. We're doing, is it realistic? Well, of course, you can get by the ethics committee if your brain's cut open for other reasons, right? The ethics committee are going to say yes, because your brain's already cut open for various types of surgery. And there have been chip implants in brains for people who needed serious brain surgery. And yes, it's perfectly possible to connect a chip to the brain, I'm afraid. The voltages in the human brain are really quite large in computing terms. It's quite easy to hook up to it. Can this be done? I'm pretty convinced, yes, direct brain interface can be done. And what's more, people can probably learn to send signals down wires through their brain. All that's stopping it is people like me saying no on the ethics committee, literally. So the coming together of humans and computers, yeah, it's realistic, I think. Now, pharmacological enhancement of cognition, I've talked about modafinil. It doesn't seem to work at the moment. Don't go looking online for drugs that will make you smarter, because there's a lot of snake oil salesmen out there. Genetic modification of human beings, is that possible? Yes, it is. It's probably worth me saying that one of my tutors as an undergraduate, a chap called Jonathan Glover, wrote a book back in the 1980s called What Sort of People Should There Be? When he said, essentially, we have to confront this difficult question, because having a moratorium against this, and there are moratoria in various countries, and I will point out that in Hong Kong there was a famous recent breach of the prohibition on doing this, and there's rumours about stuff going on in North Korea, but I'm not here to spread rumours. I think there are only rumours. Can it be done? Yes, of course it can be done. My old tutor, Jonathan Glover's argument was we have to confront the big question, because if we try and say no, we'll constantly be forced to back down as people find beneficial uses for this technology. And of course, we've all seen that in the 21st century. You're now allowed to create savior siblings. That is, you can select embryos pre-implantation so that you will bear and give birth to a child that will be a suitable donor to an existing sibling who needs blood marrow donor and so on. And there's even been a film about it. I think it's called My Sister's Keeper. And that's a perfect example of where to say no to this particular genetic selection. This isn't actually a modification. This is a pre-implantation selection, but we could do a lot more of that. We're getting better and better at it all the time. And now we have CRISPR, we can edit genes. The idea that this is science fiction, no, it's not really. And all over the world, there are people like me saying, no, I'm sorry, I won't let you carry out that experiment. You come here with a great case, and it's true that self-experimentation has a fine history in science and so on, but I'm sorry, the university just can't countenance this. But that's all that's stopping this one, I think, is people's ethical reservations.
You mentioned computer. I actually someone who had a chip implanted in his brain in an attempt to cure his Parkinson's.
Yes.
So it is happening.
Yes, it is. It's almost a recognized treatment for Parkinson's. So the idea that we can't actually direct interface with the brain, I would consider that one disproved. The only problem you've got is with the ethics committee, and we were trying to separate ethical considerations from this. Shall we move on?
Sure. You also mentioned CRISPR, and wasn't there a recent news item about a woman who had her cystic fibrosis solved by
yes,
a CRISPR addition to her genome, and she's survived for a year with a cure?
Yes. And in the case of cystic fibrosis, again, if I were on the ethics committee, I mean, that's such an unpleasant condition that I'd be inclined to say yes. Really, this stuff is coming. Yes. The hyperbolic predictions are that, AI will overtake us and there'll be a singularity, and maybe the machines will keep us as pets. I think that's a bit silly, but machines are slowly getting smarter. I also said, I don't know if I said it 2 weeks ago, but I've got to say it now. COVID's made a big difference to the status of AI. Right? Anyone who doesn't use big data and clever machine learning algorithms to trawl through that big data will be seen as a pre-pandemic Luddite now. The role of AI in predicting, in modeling the spread of the virus, in helping us develop vaccines and so on, it's given AI a tremendous status. It's no longer an experimental technique. It's just something you do. And big data is just something you work with now. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I really do think there's been a change in 2020. 2020 was the year that AI became as respectable as railways, really, just another ordinary technology. But I mean, the name's misleading. The name's highly misleading. It's not really artificial intelligence, but it is very, very effective, and it will be very effective in medicine, and not using it is really pretty stupid. And this will bring about social changes.
This is not really artificial intelligence, though, when we have machines that self-program now, write their own software.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. I'm not... I mean, we're talking technology here. If we were to talk about the ethics are very worrying. And one ethical consideration is that a lot of this is in the hands of a very small number of very rich people, mainly in California. I already sounded a warning about that. I think the next slide is a health warning. Oh, no. The next slide's Right, the cognition enhancing drugs so far are just a few lucky strikes. We don't really know how to do it. If you want to get smarter, I'm afraid you have to study at the moment. I'm not suggesting that there'll suddenly be a breakthrough in this. We'll suddenly find a pill that makes you smart. So, yeah, carry on reading, carry on studying for the moment. Next slide, please. Yeah, what can I say? There's a lot of... nothing's as hard as predicting the future of technology. I'll give you a little story now, show you just how hard it is. When Alexander Graham Bell famously got the telephone to work, he thought it would be really useful because people would be able to listen to concerts without having to go to them. And when Edison worked out a way of recording sound onto a wax cylinder, he thought this would be really useful because instead of having to go to the telegraph office to find out what the message was, it could be recorded and sent to your house. And in fact, if they'd spoken to each other, they'd realise that the applications of their technologies were the inverse of what they suggested. Yeah. And I have to admit, my predictions could be wrong too. But should we finish by just briefly whizzing through some of the ethical questions?
Sure. At the moment, my computer's not doing anything.
Okay. Right. What, if anything, should we do about it? This is, I think, this is where Homo Deus comes in and so on. I think we do have to take an attitude. We can't leave it in the hands of a few enthusiasts, and we ought to be very worried about it being just the privilege of the rich. I'll say a little more about that. I'm not arguing for some sort of socialist utopia. I'm not arguing for equality. That's a separate argument. But this is really an order of magnitude more worrying. One thing, one of the good things about transhumanism is on that site I mentioned, it used to say that by 2100, the end of this century, the difference between natural humans, that's us, and enhanced humans would be at least as great as the difference between current humans and chimpanzees. I don't know whether or not that's true, but that's what some transhumanists believe. And of course, a benefit of that is it has caused a number of philosophers in the transhumanism area, including me, to look over their shoulders at the great apes and to start talking about morality for chimpanzees and morality for apes, and realise that we do really treat the great apes quite shamefully. Again, and credit to the EU, because I'm an ethics advisor, or at least currently, was in 2019 an ethics expert for the EU looking at research projects. The EU has a complete ban on research on the great apes. The only reason you can research on one of the species like bonobos and chimps and so on is actually to benefit that species. Right? You can't use them in any other sort of research at all. I mean, they don't encourage animal research in any case, but you will only get permission to look at great apes if you're working to the benefit of great apes. And again, I've got to give applause for that. That's been a long time coming, that one.
Well, that raises the problem. Where to draw the line?
Yeah. Next slide, please. Kranzberg, back in whenever it was, 1986, wrote his famous 6 laws. The only one I'm going to bother with here is his first law, Kranzberg's first law. It's always good to have Kranzberg's first law. yeah, it's not really a law. It's just the opinion of Melvin Kranzberg, really. But I've never thought of an exception to this one. Maybe people can think of exceptions. He says technology is neither good nor bad nor neutral. And what he means by that, when you read the full text, I've read the full text for you, is it's always all three. It's always good, bad, and neutral, depending on how we use it. Again, you might disagree. You might think nuclear weapons are all bad, but challenge me on it. I've never found an exception to it. A lot of people don't agree, but I'm afraid I do agree with Kranzberg's first law. It's all about how we use it. And
I know that I was using Kranzberg's first law, but it's an argument I've employed when people say that science can be good or bad, and I tell them that science itself is just a means of discovery, and how it's applied is usually due to politicians or businessmen rather than scientists.
Oh, exactly, yeah. But he's actually talking about the history of technology. His laws are quite an interesting read too. I mean, he another one, I can't remember whether it's number 4 or number 5, is invention is the mother of necessity. In other words, people devise a technology and then start thinking about how they can persuade us all that we need it. But again, which I find myself in agreement about. But anyway, that's what it's like to do this. Can I have the next slide, please? These really are big questions. And I feel there should be widespread debate about this. And if I haven't convinced you that Homo Deus is a good title for a modern history book or for a 21st century history book, maybe this will it. What sort of people should there be was, of course, the title of my tutor's famous book, probably still available in Penguin. Since we now have a choice, well, we ought to decide. We ought to debate this. And again, I think Michael Sandel's got a good point. Just leaving it to parents can be dangerous. I mean, a lot of people will feel parents do have rights or even a duty, as my contributor, my transhumanist friend said, a duty to buy the best genes for their children. But that's part of my question, who should decide this? Is it something you give to governments? At what level should it be decided? If some people are going to be enhanced, do we need, protection for those of us who are less smart, less capable, are only going to live for a short period, and so on? And the other one is, I guess it's like the career thing for me. How long do we have to decide these things? Maybe a decade or two, but a lot of it is coming quite quickly. It's worth discussing. I don't think this should be all just considered science fiction. Oh, yeah, one day there'll be enhanced people. It's worth considering it now because it really is coming quite quickly. If you want, John, I can stop there, or I've got another few more slides about ethics. Okay.
Well, we have got some questions to address. Should we do those?
Well, there's only 3 more slides. Let's just,
Okay.
just in case it answers some questions. So those are the big questions. I think they're real questions. I think the whole world, the public, should be discussing these in as informed way as possible. I've got lots of artist friends who are discussing them, and it's not like the art world hasn't noticed this. It's not like science fiction writers haven't noticed. So, do these challenges depend on my first question, the ethical? Yeah, of course. If it doesn't happen, then there's no ethical challenges. It's just, I've made the claim that at least some of it will happen fairly soon. I say ethics is always predictive. It's always about what might happen. There's always uncertainty. Sorry if you disagree with me about that, but I think, even if you point a loaded gun at someone's head and pull the trigger, there's a chance it might misfire, and so on. And it's just a safe prediction that what you're going to do is going to have very bad consequences, and that's what ethics is like. I've given you a health warning. There's a difficulty in prediction, but my ethical position is there's no moral excuse for not trying to predict. Why didn't you see that coming? Well, we weren't certain, so we didn't bother. Well, that's not good enough. You have to do your best to predict. Next slide, please. Now, I mentioned Aubrey de Grey, and he seemed to think that, life enhancement would be available to everybody because it would give us a bigger workforce and so on. Governments would find it in their interest to make it available for everybody. I'm not entirely convinced. Humans don't have a perfect record in altruism and helping other people and so on. We have, at the moment, some particular problems for this. And here's the questions. Will all humans be upgraded? Should we let some people opt out? I mean, there will be some religious groups who will opt out of this. There may be non-religious groups who say, oh, no, I think it's all wrong. Nature knows best. Is that okay? Maybe it is. But that's the question. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Now, what I want to say, and again, you can challenge me on that, is this technology is coming at a particularly bad time for us politically, because in most countries, we're looking at a situation where societies are becoming more unequal, not more equal. So what I've called distribution problems there are going to be a problem. And when I say, how do you feel about your grandchildren growing up in a world where a few rich Californians have extended their lives and used their extended lives to increase their wealth even more? Well, maybe that's a problem. Of course, we don't have to have extreme inequality of wealth. There are an important philosopher who's argued that it's a good thing. Well, a number of important philosophers have argued that it's a good thing, and I'm quite happy to debate that. And I'm not taking a categorical position. Well, I wouldn't, would I? It's the normal thing people say to me. I'm called in as an ethics expert. They say, "Oh, we've called you in as an expert," and all you can say is, "It depends." Well, sorry, 9 times out of 10, well, no, 99 times out of 100, it does depend. Sorry, that's it. I've already said the notion that parents should buy the best genes they can for their children might make us want to rethink what rights parents do have over their children and so on. There's already some tension about this. Revealed religion, and I hope I don't tread on anybody's toes. I know I won't tread on John's toes, but I hope I don't offend anybody. But, most of the world's major religions, I can't see them going for this. Now, they're going to have a lot of problems. Right? There's an old man in Rome who's even committed against contraception. You could say, I don't care what the church thinks, but that would be a silly thing to say because most people do. Most people get their ethics from revealed religion. And a lot of people are even challenging evolution. So all I can say is religion needs to make more progress. That said, let me defend the Roman Catholic Church here, which is, you might think, a surprising thing for a philosopher to do. But I've been at one or two conferences on this area. I've been to conferences on robot morality and so on, and published on robot morality. And at some of them, there might be a priest in uniform sitting at the back typing into his laptop. So, pronouncements may not have changed, but I know the Roman Catholic Church is keeping itself informed on these matters. It's certainly listening to what we've got to say. Yes, there's a clear need for more work on the ethical issues. I don't think you should put people like me in the dustbin as time wasters quite yet, because some of these questions really are hard and they really need work. And frankly, we're not an expensive group to maintain. That acronym at the end is a Whitbyism. It stands for "This is not an exhaustive list." So feel free to add conclusions. And if you put up the last slide, I can say, for anyone who has been, thank you for listening. And there's I've advertised other people's books. Now read some of mine. Okay, thanks. Are there any questions, John? Or?
There are questions. Yes.
Can we go home?
No, we can't go home yet, I'm afraid, because our audience would be most upset if we ignored them. Let me put up some questions for you. It was interesting you talking about the speed of how soon we need to come to grips with this, because I remember with my grandfather watching Neil Armstrong bouncing about on the moon.
Ah, yes.
The old man looked at me and he said, "Do you think they'll ever get there?" He obviously thought it was a drama. And the point is that technology is accelerating faster and faster, and it's more or less overtaking us.
I'm not one who believes it's getting faster and faster. I mean, a lot of the singularitarians say this. They've got this exponential growth. And in some areas, it's more like linear, I think. I'm not denying progress. And it's odd you should mention your grandfather and Neil Armstrong, because I thought about my grandmother. Now, she really saw progress, I think. She was born in a world where people got around by horse and cart and had oil lamps and candles in the house. There was no electric light. But by the time she got married, I mean, there was a station. You could walk to the station and get on a steam train, but that was about it. By the time she got married, people had invented telephones, radios, aircraft, electric light, fridges. In fact, in the Edwardian period, there's this massive technological progress. Where almost everything in the 21st century was invented. And yet she lived long enough, and this is just one person's lifetime, to watch Neil Armstrong on television walk on the moon, right? And to fly in a jet with us to go to holiday in Spain. And yet the world in which she'd been born was very, very different. I don't think I've seen that much progress over my lifetime. But maybe that's just me. And I'm not, my whole talk, I'm not denying progress. I'm just not entirely convinced that it's accelerating out of control. And in a number of fields, it's being held back. The industry standard word processor, let me sling some mud at Microsoft here, is Microsoft Word. Well, back in the 80s, I used much better word processors than that. Yeah. So why am I using Word? Well, because a big company has held us all back. Word has all sorts of features that are almost impossible to understand, way too many commands, and doesn't do some of the things that WordStar did all those years ago. And with artificial intelligence, progress has been pretty slow, even though I've said 2020 is the year when you either use it or live in the Stone Age.
But as far as exponential speed is concerned, my father died, I think it was 17 years ago, and he was in World War II. He was an aircraft engineer. But if you could bring him back to life now and sit him in a modern car that's got a sat-nav that can talk to you and tell you how to get to your destination, he wouldn't know how to begin to explain that.
Well, maybe. I mean, as I say, I'm not denying progress, and I'm saying very much keep your eye out now for biological engineering. And if you want to send your kids to university to read an upcoming subject, that's probably it. And also the direct brain interface, I think that can be done, and it's only ethicists holding back. Do you want me to answer Matthew's question?
Yes, please.
Well, the honest answer is I don't really know. You see, by using the word transhumanism, I'm already buying into what I've admitted is a quasi-religious agenda. Well, maybe it squares up with this concept, and maybe I'm part of that wave. I'm saying, please make a societal change, because these things are too big, too important to be left in the hands of a few wealthy enthusiasts or disruptors. I could go on a long way on this, because I have mixed feelings about the disruptors. Did I mention to you, John, that I spent a day in the company of Dominic Cummings? We were both speakers at Nudge Stock 2017, and hard as it may be to believe now, in 2017 Dominic Cummings was temporarily unemployed, and I had no reason to suspect that he would become the most influential man in the country. And we discussed various things, and he is very much a disruptor, but in some ways it's valid to be a disruptor, because one of the things that holds back social change is groupthink, and the disruptors have a role. And I'm sure every transhumanist secretly thinks that, whether or not they say it to you. So maybe, this is a wave of social change, and well, I'm sure that's how they'd see it, and they're the pioneers. Let's go for it. Let's do it. And I don't know whether I'm opposing this wave. Well, I'm trying to make you aware of the wave, because it's important.
Yeah. Well, most of those things were made by mavericks, not mainstream.
I'm losing your audio, I'm afraid, John. So.
I'll try again. I said most advances in science, or maybe many advances in science, were made by mavericks rather than mainstreamers.
Yeah. Well, I suppose you're familiar with Kuhn and Lakatos and Popper and all the philosophers of that. But I don't think you can be much more outside than someone sitting in the patent office writing in their lunch hour, someone who doesn't do any research, someone who doesn't actually have a scientific position. I mean, Einstein was a complete outsider.
Yeah.
I'm sure we could think of other examples. Well, even Galileo was an outsider.
Well, Newton too.
Oh yeah, well, Newton was a very strange man.
Yes, indeed. Yes. Alchemist, weird Christian, and founder of the laws of motion.
Yeah, he thought it was a code in the Bible, didn't he? But it's something I haven't looked into. But I'm sure there are people doing this. I'm trying to be realistic. I'm trying to avoid science fiction here. You know, when I talk about slave bacteria, this is done. This is something people are working on.
Yeah, I was thinking today we could do with more understanding that people can be multifaceted. We shouldn't be pointing to the one thing that they did in their lifetime that we disapprove of now, although it was okay 300 years ago, and condemning them for that, because they had good points as well.
Yeah, it's odd you should mention that, because I spend a lot of time worrying what in 300 years, what things will I that I've done will be seen as terribly wrong.
But it's not a black or white issue. That's the point.
Well, welcome to the world of ethics.
Yes, indeed. Yes. So, what is this Tofflin concept of waves of social change? Who's Tofflin?
I assume he's some writer who thinks there are waves going. There are periods of great advance in society, and then periods of state. So rather like the Kuhnian view of science, and it's kind of true, and it's one of the reasons. When I compare myself with my grandmother, she saw the communist revolution. She saw fascism come and go, whereas I've seen very little apart from late-stage capitalism and neoliberalism. I mean, I see some alternatives in the world which frankly don't look any better to me, but I think we're kind of in a stagnant change, but who knows? Nothing like a global pandemic to prompt social change.
Should psilocybin be used as a moral enhancer?
I'm trying to... Oh, psilocybin! Yes, the chap you want to get to speak is David Nutt. You might remember him as the drug czar who was sacked for saying that horse riding is more dangerous than taking ecstasy, but there's nothing like telling the truth to get you into trouble, as many scientists and ethicists can tell you. He has some interesting results with psilocybin. Psilocybin is the active pharmacological ingredient in so-called magic mushrooms. And he suggests that it's a better treatment for depression than SSRIs. I'm here to tell you that, again, I'm not saying SSRIs don't work. I'm just saying better than SSRIs for treating depression is not a high hurdle. No. Right? They're really not that great. They work in some cases for some people. There are side effects. They do stand out in clinical trials, but they're not that great. He suggests psilocybin might be better. The problem he has, of course, is with the ethics committee. A number of problems. The ethics committee said you can only give it to people who've taken it already, otherwise you're a drug dealer and you're giving people addiction and all that sort of thing. So you've got a very limited group to experiment on. Tory MPs say, I can't believe that this person's getting government money to research something which we've declared illegal. Because, lawyers have a different view from scientists. You see, scientists say, well, let's find out whether or not it's safe. Lawyers say the law says it's unsafe regardless of what the science says. And they're just operating in different fields. You see the problem. Now, should it be used as a moral enhancer? I'm going to go, well, if you can get David Nutt to speak, he really is worth the money. But I'm going to go with more research, please. I'm not entirely convinced that people are better. I'm not saying that it's wrong, I'm saying we need more research. And it's actually difficult to do research on pharmacological chemicals that are illegal. Because again, it's like enhancement in sport. We arbitrarily declare certain things illegal. So I don't know what's an important pharmacological... Alcohol. Alcohol has a terrible effect on human beings, but it's perfectly legal. We know it's had a terrible... we've known for all of written history that it has a terrible effect, but it's perfectly legal. Psilocybin, again, get David Nutt, because he's the expert. There's not much evidence, and it's certainly not going to be anything like as bad as alcohol, but because it's illegal, it's hard to do the experiment.
Yeah. Don't you have to go to a country where they don't have laws, like, I don't know, Congo or somewhere, and do the experiments there?
Well, perhaps. Now, when I'm an ethics expert for the EU, they get very hot under the collar about exporting experiments that they won't allow. Right? I mean, all they can do is not fund it. But if they think for a minute that you're going to get around their restrictions on experimenting on animals, which really are quite tough. I remember reading the law. I think even a gerbil must be able to move in a cage that's at least 1/4 of a meter by 1/4 of a meter. Really very specific and so on. They think you're going to go to a country where, like the United States, right? You're going to collaborate with a university in Florida or California to do this, then they get very stroppy. And I'm inclined to agree. I don't think you should export your dangerous experiments to countries with laxer laws. That really is unethical. Should it be used as a moral enhancer? I think, yeah, my answer is let's try it. Let's do the research. And I'm sorry if I sound more like a scientist than an ethicist, but yeah, good research is what's got us here, rather than arbitrary judgments. I don't like that. I know, Ross. Oh, who should advise the lawmakers? Well, this is a good question. Hi, Ross. I'm on the all-party parliamentary advisory group for AI, and we do produce numerous reports and advice for the lawmakers. But in this country, I guess in most countries, the lawmakers have a political agenda. And I guess, like with the last question about psilocybin, I can say as an ethicist and an academic, I'm quite relaxed about people taking magic mushrooms. Alcohol's far more dangerous. But if any politician said that would be the end of their career. I mean, it was the end of David Nutt's work for government because, I don't know, people have very strong views. And the problem for lawmakers is essentially they've got to have the public behind them. Yeah. And the public's not that well informed and certainly not keeping up with these new developments. So it's all right for little groups of experts to advise the lawmakers, but I think the public needs to be involved, at least in a democracy, or a quasi-democracy like Britain. The public really needs to be involved with this. It'd be fashionable at this point, I think, to diss journalists, and I'm not going to do that because I know some good science journalists, and they really are doing their best to put the facts across on this. And again, I've been part of several campaigns to increase public awareness of science and so on. And for the most part, the journalists are trying their best. And if you want non-science, you go on Facebook, because most science journalists constantly, I'm being flooded with emails and questions and people phoning up saying, could this really be true, and so on. But I guess, yeah, keeping up with developments, we really do need more public awareness, which I guess is why I'm here, instead of, having a drink.
The trouble is you can't. Can you? I mean, going on TV with good science journalism puts you up against EastEnders. Who's going to win that race?
Well, it's odd you should mention EastEnders, John, because not a lot of people know this, but I do. When the BBC said they wanted to run a sitcom, like this, really to compete with Coronation Street, I suppose, because it was the BBC, the government said, yeah, you can do this, but there must be a Home Office representative on every script editing committee, and we reserve the right to suggest scripts. How much they've done this, I don't know. But, it's not just China and Russia. The government does have a say in EastEnders, and I assume they suggest scripts, issues they want to cover. So
surely that was back when there was still a hangover of the original charter instructions for the BBC, which was to entertain, inform, and educate.
yes.
That's probably history now, isn't it?
Well, you're taking a little bit of a depressed view. Certainly, I think the days when the senior level of the BBC took that charter instruction seriously and literally, those days are probably over. But, all I'm saying is, yes, people want to be entertained, but they can be educated the same. The Archers was set up to tell people when to get their Wurzels in and so on.
Yeah.
You can do this. And of course, there's so many good science fiction films about the issues I've been discussing.
Yes.
You've got to realize that they're fiction, and the rules of fiction are you have a story with a beginning and a middle and an end, and, people are interested in human drama, not science. Science is kind of less entertaining, but I think the public could consider these issues. There's certainly people who sit at the pub and say, well, do parents have the right to choose their parents? Oh, wait a minute, they'll all have boys. Is that a good or a bad thing? And I've said, look, it's an obviously stupid thing. There are other interesting things that people might or might not want to hear, but when you ask, even in China, there's a preference for blue-eyed blondes, which are, and in Japan as well. And blonde hair and blue eyes is really pretty rare in the population of that corner of the planet, but it's seen as somehow superior. And pale skin is seen as superior, and so on, just as a general rule. So if you gave parents the chance, they would choose Barbie and Ken, or at least Barbie and an MIT PhD.
They would like dog breeding.
Yeah.
They were crofts for humans.
Yeah. And that's not good. That's not good in all sorts of ways. Here's a point on which I agree with Dominic Cummings when he advertised for Weirdos. If you want to predict, right, if you want effective predictors or an effective civil service, you have to have diversity. Why? To avoid groupthink.
Yeah.
Right? If you've got 10 people in a room and they all say, well, I think this is going to happen, because they've all had the same upbringing, because they're all the same sort of person, then that proves nothing. You've got to have, you've got to have weirdos in there, basically. Sorry to have to agree with the most unpopular man in Britain, but I do agree with him about that. And we've had a spectacular lack of diversity.
Yeah.
And again, I'd point the finger at recruiters, actually. Let's tell a story from the Palace of Westminster. Every time people from the AI industry say what they want government to do, they say, talent. We're short of talent, we're short of talent, we're short of talent. And eventually I got very cross with hearing this at every meeting. And I had a rant and said, when you're in the talent supply industry, it looks very different, right? Because what recruiters want is a fresh graduate who happens to be white and male, right, with 10 years of experience of a piece of software that's only been around for 2 years. Yeah. And that you read the advertisements, that's what they ask for. And they also, I was really quite cross, and they all meekly said, oh yeah, well, we did look at our programming team, and they were all white men, and we thought we'd have to do something about that, but they haven't done anything about it.
You remind me of what Mrs. Thatcher used to say, is he one of us?
Well, yeah, but if you only listen to people who are one of you, you'll never get the original ideas. You'll never get the new ideas. Exactly. I mean, diversity is not political correctness. Diversity is the best way to work.
Yes. Yes.
And it's the commercial world that's really got problems with this. Because, coming from a military family, I can tell you the military, much maligned military that's all about following orders, treasures its mavericks. It's not for nothing that Tom Cruise plays a character called Maverick in Top Gun. But it also, our famous severely disabled war hero who stands on top of a column in Trafalgar Square is famous for disobeying a direct order.
Yes, indeed.
And every significant engagement, he cheated. He did something that wasn't in the book because that's what gets results.
Right.
Interesting, huh?
You have to be on the front line to know what might be the best course of action. So we've addressed local legislation or maybe countrywide legislation. Let's take a look. Can we solve the problems of the world?
Well, you see, I think some of these things have to be tackled at a worldwide level. In fact, this is another thing, when I was invited to give my talk to the All-Party Parliamentary Advisory Group, I said, no point in passing UK laws about autonomous vehicles or, robot nannies or caring robots. It's got to be solved at a world level. But I have an existence proof that we can have worldwide technology legislation, and that's civil aviation, right? So in civil aviation, we have global standards. Every country in the world signed up to the international agreement on civil aviation, all but Liechtenstein, which is assumed to conform under Germany. And the rules are quite strict. So if you learn to fly in Tokyo and you never fly further than Tokyo, you still got to talk in English on the radio because English is the international language of aviation. And all documents, all the navigational charts around Tokyo must be published in English. Publish them in Japanese if you like, but they've got to be published in English. And we have no blame investigation. And that's all published in English too. So that's why you can find out so much about aviation accidents. And, it hasn't stopped profit and it hasn't stopped innovation in aviation, but it's made it safe. Yeah, we can have worldwide controls on things. And, surely in 2020, we can see that things have to be worldwide. Now, I admit I'm going against certain political trends in certain countries, and the less said about that, the better. But my personal view is, these things have to be solved at a global level. And, yeah, maybe I'll be long dead before anybody hears that. But it's just ridiculous to try and...
Well, if you go up in the International Space Station and look down, the one thing you don't see are boundaries.
Exactly. Yeah. You see a little planet and we're all in it together.
Yeah. Well, since we've overrun by half an hour, you've been so fascinating.
So in response to Matthew, yeah, I say yes. But the UN's, not what it was. It's not what it was when I was a young man. And that's a shame. Yes. Because the UN should be the body for this. That's why I say I'm going against certain political trends. So the answer to Matthew's question is yes, of course, yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, the idea that people could be building clones or weird enhancements in some country where it's allowed, or even releasing E. coli. No, we do need supranational control of this. Whether or not we'll get it, I don't know. But I would say definitely yes to Matthew. Start pushing for it.
Yes. Let's do that. I agree. So thank you.
You want me to wrap up now, don't you?
You've been fantastic.
People can send me emails.
Well, yes. Well, not only that, they can, and you can comment in the comment bank underneath the video when it becomes a podcast. Immediately we stop this broadcast.
Okay.
So I just want to promote our forthcoming events, and I want to encourage people who are watching on YouTube to like and subscribe, so that and tell your friends, and so that we get a bigger and bigger following. So next week we have nuclear power, no thanks. The week after that we have dinosaurs with Dr. Susanna Maidment from the Natural History Museum. Following that, we have abiogenesis with Professor Lee Cronin from Glasgow University. Look forward to those events. Blay, you've been wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.